Hi everyone, so in this video we're going to take a quick look at the Move tool in Photoshop. The Move tool itself is the first tool located up in the toolbar, which should give you a pretty good idea that you'll be using it very often. And since you will be using it so often, it's probably worth trying to learn the keyboard shortcut for it, which is V as in Victor. Now just think of Move, and that might help you remember a little bit. The tool itself is pretty straightforward. You're just going to select your layer in your layer palette and then left click and drag to move it on screen. Now, worth knowing, if you want to get a little bit more precise, you can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to nudge the layer one pixel at a time in any given direction. So for instance, if I press the left arrow key, it's going to nudge it one pixel to the left. Also, if you want to move things a little bit more quickly, you can hold down the Shift modifier key, and then when you press, for instance, in this case left, it's going to move it at a more rapid rate in that particular direction. Now, if you want continuous movement, you can just simply hold down the arrow key, and it'll move one pixel at a time. And if you hold down the Shift key and hold down the arrow key, it's going to move more quickly. Based on the resolution of your project, it might seem like it's moving really fast or really slow, but just know that it is going a defined pixel value when you do that on your keyboard. Now with the new document, the Move tool might not seem quite as straightforward, even though it would appear to be. So if I drag this image into Photoshop and I want to move it, when I click and drag, well, nothing really happens, and in some cases you might get a dialog like this one saying that it can't move a background layer, and you can just click on convert the layer and then you'll be able to go about your business. But it's good to know what's actually happening here, so let me explain what Photoshop is meaning by that. Now when you create a project with an image, by default it's named background and the lettering is italicized. So Photoshop is kind of assuming that this is the bottom or the base layer that you're going to build your composition up on top of, and you don't really want to move it or adjust it in any way, shape, or form. Now to tell Photoshop this isn't the case, you can do one of a few things. First, you can simply click the lock icon next to the name, and that's going to actually change the name to layer 0 or something of that sort, and it's not going to be italicized anymore. And now Photoshop will treat it as any other layer, meaning you can adjust it however you want. Now another way you can kind of go about this, which in many cases is my own preferred way, is to make a duplicate copy of the layer. And you can do that by just dragging the background layer onto the new layer icon. This will make an identically named copy of the layer, but it has the word copy after it, of course. And as with our previous method, now it doesn't have the italicized name anymore, meaning that Photoshop is going to treat it like any other layer. Now I tend to use this method quite a lot in Photoshop because now if I ever alter it or mess up in some way and I can't easily recover from it, obviously we have a lot of undos in Photoshop, but let's say I save this Photoshop project. When I open it up, I can't undo anymore. But if I have the original always on hand, then I can always go back to it. Now having this extra imagery in your document does make your Photoshop file bigger over time, but if you keep things nicely organized in a backup folder at the bottom of your layer palette and just drag the originals in there as you use them, remember, you always have them at your disposal, and if your file starts to get a little bit bigger or you know you're done with that particular layer and you're not going to need to go back, you can always go and delete those files, and then your file size, once you save it again, is going to be smaller. A nice little added bonus to the Move tool is you can actually move and duplicate a layer at the same time. In order to do that, all you need to do is hold down the Alt key or the Option key as you left click and drag a layer, and you'll see that in the layer palette a clone version is going to appear, and then also you're going to be moving it to its position you want it on screen. More likely than not, you're going to see these purple guides pop up that are called Smart Guides. Those can be turned off, but more often than not, they can be really useful in getting your alignment perfectly spot on without having to zoom in and nudge it with the arrow keys. Now, where those smart guides actually show up can be dependent upon a few things. So first off, your document settings. If you're dragging a layer, it might think that you're trying to snap it to the center of the document, and it'll try and do that either horizontally or vertically. Or if you're trying to line up layers, say you have one image and you're trying to put it right next to the edge of the other layer, it'll try and do smart guessing on that as well. So they can be useful in a number of different ways. Remember, you can always turn them off, but at the same time, if it gets you in the ballpark, you can always just use the arrow keys to nudge it to exactly where you want it to be at and benefit from the added bonus of kind of having a lot of the guesswork taken out for you. Well, so I think that actually wraps up the basics of the Move tool in Photoshop. Now again, it's not really an overly complex tool, but it is one you'll use so often that it's going to become second nature and you won't even really think about it. And especially to kind of help that along, I would try and remember the keyboard shortcut for that. And again, that is V as in Victor. But if you think of Move, that might help you remember it. At least, well, it did for me. Well everyone, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next Johnny How To.